Hello, and welcome to our presentation of the Eastern Woodlands. The other day we started talking about the land bridge theory, and when we discussed the land bridge theory, we talked about how Native Americans came from Asia over the land bridge into North America. Whenever they came over that land bridge, we said that they followed the woolly mammoth. And one of the major reasons that they followed the woolly mammoth was so that they could use the woolly mammoth to live off of. They wanted to use his tusks for jewelry, and they needed it for silverware, and they also used it for some bowls and some plates because it was so thick they could carve it out and they could put food and liquids on the inside of it and use it to eat out of. They also used the hide or the skin of the woolly mammoth as their clothes, and they used it as part of their shelter. They would take it and they would cover their roofs with it to help to protect them from the sun. They could also use the inside or the carcass, the dead part of the body, and they would hollow it out and use the frame of the bones to help them with their buildings. And they would also use it to eat off of because woolly mammoths were huge. They weighed almost 2,000 pounds, and with all the meat that a woolly mammoth had, they would use that meat to feed their tribes for a long period of time. So whenever they came over the land bridge, they expanded themselves all the way through what is now today the United States. They came down through Alaska, and when they came down through Alaska, they entered into the United States and they dispersed, or they spread out through all the territories in the United States. And they began to form tribes or regions of the United States. The first region that we're going to talk about is the Eastern Woodland region. The Eastern Woodland region. We're going to take a few notes on the Eastern Woodlands, and then I'll show you a map of where the Eastern Woodland tribe is. So if you will, look at your note sheet. Follow along on your note sheet. You can pause this video at any time and copy the notes. The notes are word from the PowerPoint. You just need to fill in the blanks. And whenever you fill in the blanks, these will be the notes that you need to study to be ready for your test. If you have any questions, do not hesitate to call me. Your parents have my phone number. I send it home with them in a card at the teacher night. And you can also send a note in on the agenda. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing we're going to talk about is the tribes. A tribe is something that we'll discuss in all 5 regions that we discuss. A tribe is simply a group of families bound together under a single leadership. If you've ever watched any movies or anything that deal with tribes typically have a chief, and the chief is the main leader of the tribe. As we discuss tribes over time, you'll see that sometimes it's not always the chief that leads the group, but sometimes there's a council or a group of people that lead the group. So a tribe is a group of families that are bound together under one leadership. That means everybody is working together under a common goal, and they're listening to a single person dictate what they need to do. The next thing we're going to look at is a league. In the Eastern Woodlands, they had a league, and it was called the Iroquois League. This was an organization of people that unites under a specific purpose. That means their goal was to accomplish the same thing. And if you listen to the words Eastern Woodlands, the word wood is in there, and lumber was huge for the Eastern Woodland Indians. They lived in the forest, and in forests like what we live in today, that's where the Eastern Woodlands are, it's along the East Coast. There's a lot of deer. Deer was one of their major food crops. Not really a crop, deer aren't food, but it was one of the major animals that they would use to feed off of, or to have the hide of the animal to make clothing out of. And they would use this for the entire tribe. So the men would go out and the men would hunt. Whenever the men hunted, that was one of the major things that the league needed them to do. They would send all the boys out, and the boys would hunt. They would kill the deer. They would cut down trees, and they would bring it back to make their homes. Now, this league, or the group of leaders that led them, was also called the Great Council. The Great Council was a group of 50 representatives. A few people came from each tribe. So in the Eastern Woodland region, there were many tribes spread all the way up the East Coast. All the way from what is today Georgia, all the way up into New York, Maine, all of that area. The United States aren't formed yet, but this is the land that the Native Americans were living on. So representatives came from each of the tribes, and they formed the Great Council. The Great Council was about 50 people, and the older women of the tribe could add or take away representatives from the council. So men were on the council, but the older women decided if they got to stay or not. This made sure that not anybody had too much power, and that the power was spread throughout the people. Now, in this great region, in each tribe, there's these different tribes. There's a thing that we call a cultural region. A cultural region is just where people live who believe the same thing. So if everybody believes what you believe and you're living in the same tribe, that is your cultural region. So the Eastern Woodlands, the way they lived, everybody in that area lived the same way. So the Eastern Woodlands is a cultural region. It's how they live and it's what they do. Now, in these cultural regions, they were all working in the same direction. But one of the major directions that the Eastern Woodlands had to work in was dealing with their hunters and farmers. As I said earlier, the hunters would hunt deer. Deer was the main food crop in the Eastern Woodland region. That is very important. If you haven't heard, I've said it 3 times. Deer was the major food crop in the Eastern Woodland region. The deer, the bear, and the elk and the beaver were mainly hunted for food and clothing. If you think about it, beavers are only found near rivers. So, what do you think there's a lot of in the Eastern Woodlands? That's right, you got it. There's a lot of rivers and lakes in the Eastern Woodlands. Lakes and rivers were used for water and for fishing. So they could use the tools or the bones from the animals that they hunted and make fishing rods. They also used tree limbs, like you've seen many people do today, but they would take something sturdy so that they could help find the fish. Now, rods weren't typically as much used as they are today. Most of the time they would use spears and make spears or knives, and they would jab into the water to catch the fish. Sometimes they would just use their hands and try to reach down into the water and grab the fish with their bare hands, and they would later kill them to cook them. The fields were used to grow corn, beans, and squash. Now, many people today believe that all Indians or all Native Americans lived in what we call teepees or tents, and they took these teepees or tents with them. But this wasn't true. They had to use the wood from the forest to make their housing. And whenever they made this housing was permanent housing. They built long houses. Now, the long house wasn't like what we live in today. The long house had 12 different families living inside the long house. Now, there being 12 families living in the long house, it wasn't as easy for everybody to get things done because you had so many people on top of each other. So if you do the math, let's say that a typical family has 4 people in the family. 4 times 12 is 48. So you're looking at 48, at least 48 people that are living inside these longhouses. Now, in the longhouse, they didn't have heating and air like we did. They had one central fire that was in the middle of the house or in the middle of the longhouse. So whenever they had this fire, they would use this fire to cook the meals, and they would use it to help heat the longhouse. The longhouse was about half the size of a football field, so about 50 yards long. So you can think about how much wood it's going to take to make this longhouse or to build this longhouse where all these families could live. Now, with the longhouse, they cooked everything inside the longhouse in that fire pit. There was also different beliefs that these Native American peoples had in the Eastern Woodlands. The Iroquois, like many other Native American groups, were close to the environment and their animals. They used the environment for transportation. They used the trees for their homes. They grew corn, and they killed their animals for food. They were governed by the Great Council. Men were chosen to run the council, but older women could kick them off of the council or take them out of the council. Now, that's the second time you've heard that, so that may be something that you want to remember for your test. Older women could take men off of the Great Council. And remember, the Great Council was formed from all the different tribes that were in the Eastern Woodland region. Now, they were close to their environment, not necessarily meaning that they worship their environment, but meaning if they change their environment, they're going to use it. So whenever they kill an animal, they don't kill the animal and use part of the animal, but when they kill an animal, they're going to use everything that they can on that animal. So a lot of you may say, well, what could they use the blood for? The blood of an animal was typically used to dye their clothing or to change the color of their clothing so that they could make their clothes prettier, pretty much. Today, the Native Americans live on reservations. There's about 50,000 Iroquois living on reservations today. A reservation is a land set aside by the Native Americans. Today, the Great Council still meets. If you'll ever go up into North Carolina, into the Cherokee region, there's a place, if you've ever heard of Harris is actually in an Indian reservation. You'll see a lot of commercials for that on TV. And that is a part of an Indian reservation, and Native Americans actually run that today. The Iroquois and the Cherokee Indians run that today. Alright, now I mentioned earlier that we were going to color in the eastern woodland region of our map. Now you're going to have to listen very closely to this. I'm going to try to fill it in for us, but I'm not 100% sure that it's going to let me fill it in the way that it needs to fill in. Now the eastern woodland region was right here in this area over here on the side. So you'll see where the cursor is moving. That's the region that I'm talking about. The eastern woodland region was right here. So if you will, color that section yellow. Color this section right here yellow. The whole section. This box right here, you're going to put the letter A. You're going to put the letter A. And then down in the bottom corner, you're going to write A. And out beside A, you're going to write Eastern Woodlands. Eastern Woodlands. Whenever you do that, that makes a legend so that whenever you go back and study it, you can make sure that you name each region. On your test, I will show you this exact map, and you're going to have to tell me what region that map is showing. You're going to have to show me on the test that letter A shows the eastern woodland region, but you're not going to have the legend or your notes to go off of, so you need to make sure you're studying this map. So let's go over this one more time. This section right here, the East Coast, Florida all the way up to Maine, over here in Michigan and Wisconsin area, down, coming down the edge of Missouri. You need to color this whole section yellow. You're going to put the letter A in this box. Down here in the bottom corner, you're going to write A, Eastern Woodlands. This map can be glued into the next page of your journal. In your journal, you should have your map of the continents and oceans. You should have your land bridge theory notes. You should have your land bridge theory map. And this should be glued in right after your land bridge theory map. The title of this map is Native American Regions. Native American Regions. So make sure you get that colored yellow. Make sure you have the A put in there. And make sure that you put in your Eastern Woodlands on your legend. Remember, if you have any questions, don't forget to come ask me. You should be able to get all your notes copied in off of this and make sure everything is accurate and ready to go on Friday for social studies, because remember, we don't have social studies on Thursdays. If you have any questions, feel free to come and see me. I hope y'all had a great time in GT, and we're looking forward to having you back in class on Thursday. Have a great rest of the day.